When the calendar rolls into July and August, the entire operating environment of the futures market undergoes a severe structural contraction. The macro-institutional desks, the entities with enough capital to drive sustained multi-day momentum, scale back to minimum capacity and withdraw their liquidity from the order book. This absence of organic volume alters the baseline mechanics of the auction. The market profile is no longer dictated by heavy accumulation or distribution. Instead, it falls under the complete control of automated, low-volume algorithmic market makers. This creates the most common retail trap of the summer months, the visual illusion of the breakout. A trader will look at their chart and see a sudden, aggressive upward spike in price, misidentifying it as an impulse wave launching a valid trend day. The reflexive psychological response is to aggressively chase that momentum. Traders start buying the highs or shorting the extreme lows, anticipating that the sudden price acceleration will carry them into heavy profit. This side-by-side visualization of market depth shows why those summer breakouts are mechanically engineered to fail. On the left, a thick order book absorbs institutional size to sustain a trend. On the right, the thin summer order book allows the automated algorithm to push price past local micro-pivots with zero institutional backing. Because the book is incredibly thin, the algorithm can easily drag chasers out into the open. It runs a highly precise stop hunt, filling the retail buy orders at the absolute peak, only to immediately pull its bids and violently reverse the price direction. They lure amateur capital into the open space, trap their positions at the absolute worst possible entry point, and then slam the door on them. If you execute a standard trend-following playbook during these low-volume months, the math dictates that you will reliably fund the market maker's profits. Surviving this environment requires the immediate deployment of a defensive, highly calculated execution matrix designed specifically to exploit algorithmic mean reversion. Beating the summer drift is a matter of adapting your operational algorithms to match the market's altered microstructure. The rules of engagement have to change. When the structural environment changes, your operational posture must instantly reflect that new reality. The rapid evaporation of baseline volume creates an erratic, highly volatile surface area that is difficult to navigate with standard risk parameters. This depth of market representation shows the consequence of a thin order book. Resting limit orders physically shrink, severely widening the spread. Executing heavy market orders here causes aggressive slippage, punching through multiple sin levels and exposing the trader to random tick volatility. To counter this mechanical risk, we enforce the first operational law of the survival matrix, state zero posturing. State zero mandates that operators mathematically reduce their active contract payload size by an absolute minimum of 50. It keeps your overhead low so you can remain entirely objective and clear-headed while amateur traders are violently whipped out of their over-leveraged positions. With the payload structurally protected, your spatial execution rules must undergo a similarly drastic shift. This tracking interface maps the fragmented summer NASDAQ 100. We anchor the session's opening print, designating it as the center pivot. The interior price action immediately surrounding this pivot is pure toxic noise. Executing trades inside this middle zone is strictly prohibited. Without institutional funding, price momentum chokes as it stretches from the mean. We map exact standard deviation boundaries to find acceptable execution zones. These hard lines act as concrete walls, the DRW H1 and L1 gates, and the outer extremes. The operator must adopt the patience of a sniper. You completely ignore the chaos in the middle of the screen and wait for the low-volume liquidity drift to slowly push price all the way out to these extreme boundary walls. Returning to our mapped chart, we watch for a very specific technical signature. Price stretches up to strike the solid H1 boundary line, instantly loses torque, and leaves behind a local micro-rejection wick. That exhaustion wick at the outer boundary is the final mechanical confirmation required to safely fade the overextension. By refusing to fight in the toxic middle, you force the algorithm to overplay its hand, ensuring you only enter the market at mathematical points of total exhaustion. Executing fades at extreme boundaries is only mathematically viable if your risk guardrails are flawlessly sharp and rigidly enforced. We establish absolute risk against this boundary exhaustion using a hard-coded framework known as the True C fading zone. This close-up view of the H1 boundary rejection shows the exact mechanical placement of the stop-loss order. The risk line is placed exactly one tick past the absolute high of the exhaustion wick. This one-tick risk parameter is non-negotiable under any operational circumstance. The risk is locked. You define the exact point of structural failure, giving the market zero excess breathing room. Returning to the chart, we must account for the structural anomaly. If a 5-minute candle manages to punch through the true C boundary and close cleanly outside of the extreme risk line, the setup is dead. This specific price behavior completely invalidates the mean reversion thesis. It signals that the regime has briefly shifted away from algorithmic drift and into a rare, institutionally backed breakaway day. The immediate required action is to take the paper cut loss. Because you are executing at state zero sizing, the financial impact to your account is negligible. Once the thesis is invalidated, you instantly shut the machine down. Do not argue with the tape, and do not flip your bias. Tying your maximum risk to a single tick transforms an unpredictable, low-liquidity market into a highly controlled, asymmetric environment. You know exactly what a loss will cost before the order even fills. Once you secure a high-probability entry at the outer boundary and your one-tick risk is locked, you shift your entire focus to the exit strategy. This macro view of the full session displays the structural balance point. The opening print acts as a gravitational magnet for algorithmic drift, pulling price back toward the mean. Profits are strictly taken as the price reverts back to this exact session center of gravity. You reap the payload at the center pivot and exit the market. The summer survival matrix operates on strict cause and effect. Low institutional liquidity creates thin order books, which algorithmic market makers exploit to engineer breakout failures. To survive the resulting tick noise and slippage, you deploy state zero posturing, mechanically reducing your contract payload by 50%. You completely prohibit trend chasing in the toxic middle of the chart, waiting out the liquidity drift to execute strictly at the DRW H1 and H2 extremes. You lock your capital exposure to a single tick past the standard deviation exhaustion wall, absorbing paper cut losses without hesitation if an anomaly occurs. Adhering to these rules systematically exploits the Summer algorithm's structural limitations. It turns their stop hunting mechanism into your primary source of entry liquidity. Respect the seasonal math. Keep your overhead low, hold the outer standard deviations, and let the amateur trend chasers fund the market maker's vacation. Total systemic discipline guarantees that you can extract cold, calculated alpha from an environment specifically designed to destroy the undisciplined.